Hi, welcome. Welcome everybody. And this is Sairam Krishnan from Freshworks. We are the world's leading makers of customer engagement software. As you know, that's why you're here. I welcome you all to the webinar, which it's one of our first webinars on customer engagement itself, though we do a lot of other stuff. And so therefore, welcome. With Freshdesk, Fresh Service, Fresh Chat, Fresh Sales, Fresh Connect, and more. Our products work together to help companies provide the best customer experience possible. Which is kind of a neat segue into why we are here this evening, India time at least. Say hi to Martin Hill-Wilson, please. Customer service.
Good evening, good morning to everybody.
Hi, Martin. We just have 1 second. DS has raised a hand. I'm just like figuring that out. Say hi to Martin Hill-Wilson. He's a customer service CX and AI engagement strategist that we've been talking to. I'll give you some background on him. He's an independent consultant with a long-standing track record in customer engaging strategy and implementation. Martin was involved in the very first wave of contact center implementation during the 80s, where he rose to be CEO actually at the Merchants Group. He's done loads of work on customer engagement, and we are here with him so he can share his knowledge and experience with us. Welcome, Martin. We will be talking about why omni-channel service is the future of customer engagement, something that's very important now for organizations and for us too at Freshworks. Martin will sketch out why omni-channel service is going to be the way customers engage with brands, and how this will open up brands to the challenge of greater complexity and increased operational costs. Martin will share the design framework and key principles as well, so that you can do like omni-channel service better than ever. Before we start, I'd like to tell our listeners that they don't need to take notes. If they like something here, we'll be sending a recording of the webinar, as well as what we talked about in a white paper. So sit back and let's learn together. Also, at the bottom of your screen, you can ask any questions you might have. We'll try to answer as many as possible during the duration of the webinar. So yeah, let's take it away, Martin. I'm going to mute myself from here and just jump in whenever there's something else. Go on, Martin.
Hi, thank you very much, and hello to everybody and welcome. Looking forward to spending some time together with you on this particular topic. From my perspective, the work that I'm doing, omni-channel design still remains very much a key priority for the clients that are trying to do something in response to their customer demand. In fact, I just did a workshop on this very topic last week over in Dublin. It's a very popular an animated conversation. It's clearly something which is important, but also quite difficult to get to work in practice. And what I'm going to share with you today is the outline of that. As Sai said earlier, we haven't actually got a white paper which digs into more detail, but we've certainly got enough time to go through the key framework and the key principles. If you would like to ask questions, make comments, during the course of it, then Sai will pick those up and we can have that debate. We've got a few pause points in terms of polls as well. So again, anything that you want to contribute to the discussion, please feel free to do that. That being said, let's dig straight into the beginning of the conversation. What do we really mean by omni-channel? What are we really trying to achieve? And what are some of the things that in practice have made it a difficult thing? I think regardless where you are physically located and the geography of the customers that you're serving, I think that one thing is common is the fact that there is more choice that we now have to offer to our customers. And that additional choice in terms of how they can engage with us, their own preferences, really adds complexity to our requirement for being effective in interaction and communication with them. One way to look at that complexity is generationally speaking, you know, and that those 5 generations of customers are typically orientated towards different kinds of expectation in terms of how they like to engage. And we're now spread across 3 modalities. We've now got voice, which I think has traditionally been the way in which the majority of contact centers have started out in life, certainly if they've got a track record longer than 10 years. Text really has grown very powerfully, and we've got a whole array of different forms of text, from the slowest letter, which is still used quite extensively for complaint management for certain generations, through to instant messaging and the like. And video, although it remains a much smaller by volume, it's also got some extremely powerful use cases associated. So in terms of your choices, you've got 3 modalities to choose from. You've got 3 different ways in which to deliver it as well. Assisted service refers to the fact that you're using it and powering it by a human being, i.e. an advisor sitting within your customer service operation. They can be doing that over voice, text or video. You've got self-service, which basically means that the customer is driving their own resolution. And proactive service refers in this context to the notion that if you look at customer journeys, are you spotting any points in that journey at a particular point in time? For example, I don't know, a couple of months into somebody being onboarded, maybe just prior or after a complaint. Anywhere that you can actually see there is a pattern of behavior and enough customers are doing something in terms of making contact to you. And as a result of being able to see that pattern, you should be able to say, well, why aren't we proactively communicating to them? Why are we making them put all the effort in here? And so proactive is all about anticipating customer demand and responding to it. So, as I said, there is a lot of different ways in which these days we can communicate. Advisors have got voice, text, video. We've now got the whole emerging world of digital assistants and bots, and again, they come in either voice and or text flavor. IVR these days, for those of us who've used it over a whole number of years, we now discover that we can actually do that through visual medium as much as audio, and that's actually extremely important, particularly with digital customers and smartphone customers. On text, we've got letter, mail, email, chat, SMS, rich communication services, RCS. And I think the thing to say about the text medium at this point in time is it still remains extremely popular and also creative, in the sense that we're still discovering new ways in which we can use text to communicate with people. And then we have a whole array popping up through AI, cognitive services. We've got the whole apps generation, certain applications in AR and VR, or hybrid, which is probably more popular, again, is particularly useful, maybe sometimes in sort of field service context, but still new ways in which we can engage and solve our customers' problems. And then we've got the traditional stuff around of service portals, FAQs, etc., etc. And then finally, on top of all of that, of course, we've got different ways in which the customers are going to come and access that. Everything from desktop, laptop, tablets, phones, smartphones, wearables to some degree, but then we're beginning to see the whole phenomena that, again, the voice interfaces have precipitated, and they are available to us initially anyway through speakers. Some of us might have cars that we can speak to. Some of us have probably got TVs that we can speak to. And again, the whole Internet of Things phenomena is about both connecting those entities to the net, but also enabling us to engage with them. And speech is proving to be a powerful interface as far as that's concerned. So my point is this: as more of that choice continues to arrive, you are faced with much greater complexity in terms of the cost of that and also the operation of that. And from the customer's perspective, of course, that complexity has to be hidden. It still has to be an extremely low effort form of engagement from your perspective. So there you go. That's the problem that you've got. How do you solve that? By the way, just looking forward slightly, and I think it will be different according to which part of the world you're in, what's next in terms of the next big channel? For some people, it's messaging very strongly. This is a UK perspective, interestingly. And from our perspective, probably the most important next channel that people are investing in and focusing on is live chat. And that has really grown at the expense of voice. So, Sai, I don't know from your perspective, your customer base, is that reflective of what you're seeing? Is chat a popular thing at this point in time?
A lot, actually, Martin. What's happening, what we can see from at least our customers is that, at least from our Fresh Desk customers and our Fresh Service customers, is they've been asking for chat as not as a sort of add-on, but as one of the primary things that in their contact centers or whatever, however they are thinking about their customer engagement, chat is one of the primary things they're talking about. It's not an add-on anymore. It's just primary in their strategies.
Well, I think that comes back to the point that I was making, that, you know, as far as the 5 generations of customers are concerned, they've definitely got their preferred modality. And there's a whole, you know, generation of people for whom chat is the way in which they do business with friends, family, and also with brands. And so, as you say, it's a primary channel.
It is.
Now, with all of that, and what I would say also is this, that I think a lot of people are very keen to try to say, right, you know, a particular channel, let's say voice, isn't going to be as popular. Let's migrate everyone to a single new channel. And we can have an ongoing debate about that. But from my perspective, I don't think that form of strategy is effective. Certainly, if you have a spread of customers, because you have to actually cater to that spread of expectation. But there are going to be very, very few organizations that, for example, can just say, we only do chat, that's the end of it. We only do messaging, that's the end of it. Equally, you can't get away these days with just doing voice. So you're going to have to deliver against a broad expectation, whatever that mix is going to end up with. And if you accept that particular point, then looking at the screen right now, you have a number of problems. A lot of people, in terms of the way they've organized themselves around of omni-channel, have done it in a classic functionally orientated way. So you will find somebody who owns the voice channel, somebody who owns probably what's called digital, which might include chat, might include messaging, probably include social customer service. And as such, they are going to be managed separately, possibly even in different teams across different sites. Again, they may be reporting into different parts of the business, and that might be further split and fragmented in terms of your own in-house teams versus people who provide some of that service for you offshore or as an onshore partner. And the problem with all of that is that from the customer's perspective, it doesn't lend itself to having a seamless conversation in terms of being able to deliver what the customer wants, regardless of the way they choose to engage. And so one of the big things in terms of doing omni-channel is to look again at the way in which you have organized the management and whether or not you can see the complete picture of all the ways that customers are engaging, or indeed you have both purchased and you deliver and manage channels in too fragmented a way. So again, Sai, from your perspective, what implications, if you've seen that in your customers, do you see coming out of the fact that people are a little bit siloed in their approach to both procurement and their management of channels?
Yeah, that's a very interesting thing that we're seeing, at least in our customers. Martin, what's happening is that there are quite a few, for instance, I'll give you an example. So when there are separate channel owners, right? Here's a customer who is talking to our sales team, and he wants to know answer to this one specific question: is this feature available for me or not? But the salesperson does not know which aspect of customer support is he in, or which level of customer support is he in with, or what questions he's asking customer support. If they had that context, he would have been able to address that customer's problem even better and perhaps close him as a sale. This absence of context between, for instance, a sales agent and a customer agent is something that we are seeing and something that organizations are looking to address more and more. We also get this idea of like there are people, or at least customers, coming to talk to them on different channels. For instance, somebody is talking on social, or if the same customer reaches out to us on separate channels as well. So, they get multiple answers because we have multiple touch points answering them. That's a huge problem that organizations want to solve as well.
And as you dig further into that, you can find there's different service levels. As you say, there's consistency of knowledge. There is no context and intent. Customers have to begin conversations again. And so that choice, which initially was a strong point, falls apart because it's just so damn difficult to get stuff done with customers, with companies like that. So I think you've made the point really well that, you know, if you are going to deliver on omni-channel, You have to, well, there's a whole ton of stuff you've got to get right, organizationally, technically, et cetera, et cetera. Otherwise, the customer's going to suffer at the end of the day. Thanks for that. So what are we talking about? Actually, it segues very nicely into this point. I think one of the most important things with your strategy is just to have a working definition in your own mind to share with your own internal colleagues about what we're trying to do. Now, again, up to you to define that. My definition of that is to say, from the customer's perspective, you're able to deliver an engagement experience that works in any given customer situation. So wherever they start on a channel, wherever they end up on a channel, whatever device they've got, whatever literal situation they find themselves in or particular topic they want to engage with you on, it results in something that works for that customer. And that, to me, provides you a point of reference in terms of how you want to design your contact strategy and really the scope and the size of the issue that you're confronting. Because, again, just to make the very obvious point, which some people still miss, the technology component of this, which is vital, is still and remains the enabler. It is not the strategy as such. There is still a lot of thought you've got to put into terms of how the journeys work, how you organize the people and the teams, and how you orchestrate and bring that whole experience together. And that's what this particular definition attempts to reference in terms of what you are trying to achieve with the customers. And right in the middle of that, by the way, and this is part of a much larger discussion, is that even though we are at last moving into a world where automation, conversational interfaces, the smartness of some of AI technologies, enabling the growth of self-service, does that mean that therefore the call center is about to basically remove all human engagement and automate everything? And the answer I have to that is absolutely not. You are still going to be looking at how you synergize automation and human engagement. Now, the balance of that may well be different in the future from being primarily human-based to being a much more balanced and nuanced one. I'll talk a little bit more about my view about where that ends up. But the whole issue from a design perspective is that you're not trying to replace one with the other. What you're trying to do is to bring them together in an effortless way, depending on the type of journey and depending upon the expectation. And the way in which you build that, the logic for that, is really fairly simple. As far as the live component is concerned, the human beings, for me, there is an enduring future. In other words, it's not going to go away. And the way that we use people best is when the topic of engagement is either emotional for the customer, it's complex for the customer, and it matters to the quality of the relationship. And that's the time where you invest interaction by people with people. That's the time in which it really matters. And that's where we're going to end up with humans being focused, because the remainder will be picked up by self-service. And self-service is incredibly important, mainly because it fits an expectation we all have now as consumers, that you are constantly available to us 24/7. And also we have a great sense of independence. We want to be able to find out stuff. We want to be able to educate ourselves. We want to be able to fix stuff. We want to be able to buy stuff. We want to be able to register on board, find out stuff under our own steam. And so self-service not only fits the expectation that we have as customers to be independent in our behavior, but also we don't really want to be using people in situations where actually the level of information is pretty simple to understand. It's available, it's in the public domain, it's on our website. However, we're still expecting people to sit in a queue and get that answer via a human being. That's a really not very wise way of investing in what is an expensive resource to people. And then, as I said earlier on, we have proactive service, which is really when customers' needs can be anticipated, and it's the right place and it's the right time. So those are the three things that we're trying to do in terms of getting a re-optimized balance between when it's live, when it's self-service and proactive. And the picture that you can see here now on the right-hand side, the top one represents probably where most people are at, where the vast majority of engagement from customers remains driven by live voice, live text. The bottom one suggests that, in fact, in the future, the times when it's emotional, when it's complex, and when it matters to the relationship shouldn't really be any more. There may be 20, 25% of the time. and the remainder can be taken up by self-service and also by proactive. So this is exciting and interesting. Whether that you get there in a year, you'll be very lucky. Whether or not that takes you 3 or 4 years, which is more likely, we're on a journey together. And once we get to that particular point, what's interesting is, of course, you've got a quite different operating model that now results from that, because you have got fewer people focused on the interaction. You've probably got more people doing other interesting things within the customer service operation, but you've fundamentally got a new type of operating model. So,
Martin, just interjecting here before we move on, something that our head of Europe has been talking about for a while is that if you could move on to the last slide, it's just building up on the point that you're making. Almost 67% of customer churn is preventable if the customer issue was resolved at the first engagement, which makes the first contact resolution that much more important.
Yes, I would absolutely agree. Again, any type of customer survey saying really what matters, there's 3 things, isn't there? There's always getting what you wanted, the amount of effort, and how you feel about it. But if you can't deliver the answer to customers, you're in trouble. Couldn't agree.
Absolutely, Martin.
Absolutely right. So, reflecting on that it's a challenge, it's a difficult thing, I thought we'd hear from the audience and see what you have got to say about this. So, referencing your own omni-channel strategy, you might call it multi-channel, you might call it contact, whatever like that. What are your current challenges at the moment? Is it having access to and using the right tech? Is it, as I was talking about earlier on, how you're organized? Is it understanding what matters to those customers and being able to distinguish, therefore, their preferences for engagement? Is it really a lack of sort of, overall strategy? Or actually, number 4, is it not really, the journeys that we've got aren't really in a good state? So if you could let us know which one is top for you at this particular point in time, that would be great. Give you a couple of minutes just to think about that and to let us know. Thank you.
Yeah, I've just opened up the poll for our attendees. They're answering. I'll just let you know in a bit.
Right. So by the way, for people still looking at that, the state of our customer needs, number 4, that should be the state of our customer journeys, just to be clear about that.
Right, it should be the state of our customer journey, correct.
Yeah.
Right, Martin, I think we have a couple of winners here. That the current top challenges is how the companies are organized.
Okay.
And understanding customer needs. They are tied, actually.
Are they easy winners or only just?
Easy winners, I would say.
Easy winners. Okay, that's interesting. That's interesting. So really, the voice of the customer and getting to grips with that. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a while. I can give you some practical stuff, and then internally how we're organised. Thank you for that. Appreciate that point. Right. Let's move on. So that being said, let me share with you a framework for helping you plan and execute your own strategy. So to the first point, actually, about understanding customers. Let's just dig into this a little bit. The key question I think that you're trying to answer here is, where are your customers on their own personal digital journeys? If you reflect on your own behavior, what you were doing maybe even just 3-4 years ago, in terms of apps, in terms of smartphone, in terms of, well, let's talk about using chat. Maybe you didn't. Have you yet used messaging extensively? You will probably be doing that in the next 2 to 3 years if you're not doing it right now. Have you used an Alexa? Have you used a Google Assistant? So, things are changing with our customers, and we want to know exactly where they are on that personal journey. Actually, interestingly, I think this also has challenged the supplier market, the vendor market, in terms of how they've had to evolve to accommodate that.
In a lot of ways, actually, as well. And here's like a stat that we've been thinking about. Companies with extremely strong omni-channel customer engagement sort of retain 89% of their customers. So I'm talking about um, at least companies who have evolved their customer engagement strategies.
Yep.
So they were able to retain on average 89% of their customers compared to 33% for companies with like weak engagement. So this is important to us because we also customer churn and how companies are holding on to their customers is a very important stat for us.
Yes.
So as I said, 89% versus 33% is a huge difference.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, I mean, we haven't got time for it in today's session, but I could throw you back at least another half dozen surveys that reflect exactly the same pattern. You know, we as customers have low rates and thresholds of tolerance if it's not easy to engage with those brands. We will walk as a result of that. So key lesson.
And then also we've one of the things that we've been like trying to help companies with is how they're organizing themselves, the tech that they are using. Companies have to think about the kind of tech and the kind of service providers they're using so that they can take all the data and use them all in terms of context so that they are able to get so they're able to deliver like the best customer experience possible. That's something that at Freshworks, at least, that this is what we are thinking about. And this is what most of our customers are asking for as well.
Yes, yes. Again, that's a theme that I can resonate with, and I hear a lot again over here in the UK. Interesting commonality. So what we're trying to do here is gather an insight and keep up to date on the insight in terms of how our customers behave. And probably the key thing implicit in what we've just been saying is that, unfortunately, in fact, I have a customer who's just about to start work with me, and they're in the transport business. And they've stated their goal as wanting to be best within the transport business. The trouble with that objective, of course, is that expectations are not just driven within, oh, I wonder how good it would be in food. I wonder how good it would be in travel. I wonder how good it would be, you know, in clothing. Unfortunately, we see these iconic brands or people who are doing some really interesting new things with apps and generally disrupting expectation. And we start to look around and go, well, if they can do that, why can't they do that? And of course, what happens is that suddenly the whole bar in terms of standards is raised. So everybody is in a global race across all sectors. And what was acceptable last year, what was acceptable this year, what will be acceptable next year, continues to rise. And that's one of the things that we have to keep our eyes and ears open for. Within that general point that it's getting higher, there are some specifics that absolutely matter. And I think we've already mentioned this a number of times over. We have channels, we have choice. How we actually manage to deliver outcomes through those channels really matters. And probably one of the most difficult ones is social. Let's up those standards even more and say it's a banking brand that is on social. It's extremely difficult to have a conversation about some of your security issues on Twitter. We all understand that point. So often people simply say, well, please phone us. The issue with that, of course, is that you then, it seems and it looks like you're busting people back to the back of the queue. You know, start again. I'm sorry, we can't help you as far as that's concerned. Here's an example from UK Barclays. Again, it's just a typical situation, which is, if you can see in the second part of the conversation there, now we've reached a point of complaint. Unfortunately, we cannot continue this conversation online. We now have to actually put you into a secure channel. So we've got to go somewhere else. And the disruption of that conversation as a result of that is the thing that's difficult. We are moving into a world where we've got virtual assistants and we will be zipping backwards and forwards between assistants and humans. Again, how do we deliver that single integrated conversation without additional effort? Here's another one, which is that actually a lot of social advertising these days does create a call to action that customers respond to. As a result, interestingly, they are clicking to call. So those inbound inside sales teams are receiving those, but they have no contact. They don't actually know what the campaign is. So again, they're flying by. There's an example of trying to understand how customers want to engage and areas where they expect a better result from them. You know, so again, what do those 5 generations of customers expect? We can see that if you look at just by channel, and there's loads of results and surveys on this, there is definitely a weighting towards different generations. Phone remains popular, typically with slightly older generations. Messaging typically is more popular with slightly younger generations. It's one aspect of what people expect and what they want. You can see it here, again, the same idea that for a certain generation, the phone really is not popular, mainly because actually it dominates my attention span, and my time is very precious in a connected world where I'm multitasking all the time. I would much prefer to engage with you in a way that allows me to get on with other things as well. And that's one of the, the core promises of messaging, that being an asynchronous channel, in other words, it can continue over time, not in real time. It trumps chat to a degree. It certainly trumps voice, because it allows me to communicate and get a response at the convenience of me rather than the convenience of you, the brand. And so there's an argument. Who does that apply to as far as your customers are concerned? This is another absolutely key question, and whenever I ask it, unfortunately too few organizations know the answer. In terms of the way that customers engage with you coming into your contact center, what percentage do that over a smartphone? And the reason for having a stat on that and knowing what the answer to that question is, because it determines expectation. Smartphone users, in other words, expect things instantly in context, regardless of channel. It sets a standard. It's also, by the by, got a much smaller screen, just in terms of form factor. That starts to influence things such as the delivery of self-service. You cannot have a long-winded, probably text-based set of answers in your FAQs if the customer's primarily consuming that over a smartphone. It needs to be put into a much more simplified format. A smartphone also is a quite extraordinary device in terms of the numbers of sensors and the types of sensors in there. It can redefine the smartness with which, for example, you can deliver certain kinds of self-service. So again, it allows you to architect new ways of delivering that self-service. Therefore, understand how many of the customers are actually actively using smartphones to engage with you. At the end of the day, you can certainly pick up the research, and there's lots of it, which you need to be looking at to see the trends. But there's another very simple way of doing it, which is to complement that. That's to ask customers. Key points, onboarding, maybe when you're cross-selling, when you're in a renewal cycle, whenever it is, ask customers, how would they most prefer to communicate? And if they exhibit a strong preference, a particular channel, put it into CRM, and then make sure that becomes part of your business rules, which are triggered whenever they actually engage with you. It also, by the way, is a very good way of developing a forecast in terms of demand for certain channels going forward. So I commend that idea to you to start getting that data. However, and whatever you're doing in terms of collecting your own voice of customer, or indeed plugging into public domain sources of data, turn it into something that people can then use. So this will be, for example, the 2019 insight that we have about our customers' behaviors. There's a whole number of ways of segmenting it that we've talked as far as the digital adoption is concerned, who's progressive and who is conservative. And this is an imaginary statement of progressive customers. They are mainly focused on you delivering service to them through self-service, proactive. They do want live, and they still expect escalation. They are comfortable with personalization. In fact, they expect it, and they will therefore give you that data in return. Smartphone-oriented messaging they prefer. Please don't use email. That's not their generational expectation at all. So that would describe that kind of persona. On the other hand, you have got somebody who really does still prefer to use people as the main way in which things get sorted out. Doesn't matter, it could be voice or text. Email, still acceptable, understand it, have grown up with it. Appreciates relevant proactive, so doesn't see that as an intrusion, providing it's relevant. They also appreciate personalized service, but, and here's the but, they do want to know how you are collecting their data, how you're using it, so that matters more to that particular type of customer if they're going to pursue more digital forms of engagement with you. So there you go, there's your stretch, and that would then start to inform you in terms of how they would like to work with you. So that's the first piece, knowing their preferences. The next part of the planning framework is to really understand what they're trying to do with you. What's the job that they're trying to achieve? What's their situation? And that should be represented in your customer journeys. Now, again, having spoken to many organizations and individuals on this, it seems to be still, well, the leading edge brands will have done some journey mapping. They will have done some journey planning, either having skill within the customer service environment or accessing more probably resources at enterprise level, most probably sitting in the customer service experience groups. So people will have come along and said, what are your 6 or 7 major journeys? How does the contact center fit within those? And then they visually represent it in terms of mapping it out so you can see what matters to the customer and the sequence of things and what particular systems and data and individuals are employed in the delivery of that particular outcome. The key principle for that, though, is the difference between thinking from your perspective as the brand and thinking outside in thinking, which is really representative of what matters to the customer. So customer journeys, the difference between a customer journey and an internal process is from what perspective are you looking at the priorities? From the brand's perspective or from the customer? And customer journeys is all about thinking about it from their point of view. Within your journeys, let's say you've got half a dozen of them for the sake of discussion, you're always going to have a set of constants, things like speed, relevance, context, personalization, empathy. And again, what's interesting is when you look at journeys and start to become familiar and you can manage against those different expectations, the mix of priorities will change. Some journeys really do require a great deal of empathy because, going back to the point, it's all about, it's a difficult situation, it's an emotional one, let's say it's to do with health, let's say it's to do with a crisis, whatever it is. That matters a lot. Other ones, no, not really. It's just a very quick interaction and really speed and relevance are the top priorities as far as that particular job is concerned. So understand the journey helps you to understand the customer priorities. And the way of working on that is probably summarized these days within the discipline and the skills, which is now called service design. So while you might not have heard of the language of service design, if you look at the picture, I'm sure you have seen that kind of work going on. All of us do that in our workshops, and when it's deployed around a journey mapping, then those stickies are particularly popular. It helps us to flesh out the journey and organize and think about how it actually works in practice. So the other thing I'd like to say about journeys, by the way, is as we move progressively into digital forms of engagement, quite rightly, as again we start to think about customers and smartphones and apps, the thing we need to remember is there's always still a human with an experience on the other side of that screen. And so therefore your digital engagement absolutely needs to be emotionally grounded. Extremely important. While speed is not vitally important, so too is making us feel we've been heard, we've been listened to, we've been adequately catered to. So digital strategy in particular needs to check out and make sure that it's meeting the human touch expectations. And then the final thing to be said is if you are thinking about it from the outside in, make sure that what you're designing and improving benefits me. And this is a fail because a lot of the times that people invest, for example, in new technology, is to deliver a cost saving. And if you're delivering a cost saving, and that's the business case, you tend to design and improve things from that perspective. As a result of that, you may well have put an IVR in place, you may well have put a chatbot in place, which from your perspective, hopefully has diverted the cost of live to another way of doing stuff. But from the customer's point of view, there's no clear benefit and they're irritated. And the reason that we don't win on that is that if customers don't see a benefit, they're not going to employ and use it, in which case you're not going to get your business case value at the end of the day. So again, with this theme of customer journeys, looking at the outside in, motivate me as a customer and change my habit by making the new journey clearly better than the one that you had in place before. That's an extremely good, powerful principle to have right from the outset. There's a big clue, by the way, in terms of what that should be themed on. This is something that is pretty much universal. In a digital economy, we all feel life is too complex, too fast, too many choices, too rapid, very little opportunities to turn off, you know, the work-life balance, all of that stuff. Most people would like their life simpler. Most people feel overwhelmed. So if you can get that built in, baked into your redesign of customer journeys, you are satisfying a really important need that all customers have, and they will reward you in terms of continuing to engage. Part and parcel of this idea of trying to be more cost effective is the fact that, yeah, chatbots are great, self-service is great, and indeed customers prefer, you know, often to be able to engage in their own time, in their own particular context. However, even when you've got a successful channel up and running, please do not make the mistake of imagining, therefore, that you're not going to let customers use a live form of engagement. And always make sure that you have made it highly visible and easy to spot the route to access people. And if you've got the journey design correct, by the way, most customers will not want to spend more time trying to seek out live assistance. It's only when the unexpected happens that they want to do that. So if you design your self-service effectively, it delivers what the customer expects, they're going to stay in channel anyway. They're not going to do it, but it still matters that you have made it easy for them to discover help if and as and when they require that. And then within that escalation, here's again an absolutely vital thing, which I think is going to take most of us a good couple of years before we've got this going. And that is, as we move between virtual assistants and human, what we need to make sure is that the context as embodied within CRM and the intent, which is trying to understand what the customer is trying to achieve in this particular interaction, is something that follows us across channels and across the virtual and the human divide. And that applies to speech and text as much as to inbound and or to outbound. So this is the whole business about making life easy. And again, already you can see chat deployments where people have to go back and repeat themselves. That's not very smart. And if you're looking at the impact that AI has got in the world, probably we're not going to get rid of people in contact centers, but what we will do is share the load between a virtual assistant and ourselves across customer journeys. So therefore, the direction of travel is likely to be that we will employ both forms of assistance within a single journey, making this point even more vital. And I think, Sai, just quickly, you wanted to make this point that you've really got to deliver in terms of allowing customers to get what they want via their chosen way of engagement. Are you still there?
Sorry, Martin, I lost you there at the last second. What did you say again?
No problem. So just to make that quick point that when we were discussing earlier on, it's important that we develop channel strategies that lets people and customers complete what they're doing within channel, and that we shouldn't be attempting to deflect people.
Right. And this is something that our CMO had written about in a blog post entitled "The Death of Deflection." I think what has happened in the last, like, at least a few years is that customers are increasingly impatient about the kind of service as well as the speed at which they are getting that service. For instance, they do not want to be told that, hey, why don't you send me a ticket on this portal so that I can get back with you faster? Or perhaps, hey, you sent me a Facebook message, why don't you call me at this number so that I can service you, right? The customer is not going to wait for you, and he's just not going to hold for that. That has completely changed the way in which organizations are having to think about providing customer service. Nobody is going to wait, and nobody is going to be okay with deflection. And that's why, as I say, the transition, as you say, Martin, between the human to virtual assistant should be seamless in any way. If somebody is going to chat with you, they are not going to wait for even an extra minute more before they get the answer. It's up to the organization to figure out how they're going to make it seamless.
So the moral of that story is don't play hide and seek with your customers.
Exactly.
There we go. Right, so that's the second side. That's all the bit about journeys, absolutely vital. Now let's have a quick look at the last area about contact options. And you know, the right mix. There's no such thing as a right mix. Please don't go to conferences. Please don't look at use cases and go, oh, they do it that way, therefore we're going to do it that way. That's not the design principle. The design principle is it's based upon the nature of the journey. It's based also upon those preferences, and you've got to blend them together. Now, having said that, it's also true that there are strengths and weaknesses by channel. I am not a subscriber to the idea that there's a silver bullet channel which is better and superior to everything else. It all depends. And as far as video is concerned, it has great strengths because obviously you can still see people and see people's faces particularly, which matters around of trust. For example, the picture you can just see in the background there is a UK brand which is using video in order to be able to sell mortgages, because the decisioning is probably emotional, because you need to trust the advisor, therefore seeing their face helps as far as that's concerned. Visualizing service issues. Some really advanced people are using computer vision at the moment to be able to remotely, with human assistance, manage and fix broken mobiles and laptops. Show and tell for online sales and education. An old story now, but again, a company in the UK were using video conferencing to literally show the customers shoes as it happens. The fact you can see the object has increased the basket size and the conversion rate as a result of that. So video has got obvious strengths, superior to face-to-face. Also become very popular in banking as well, because with the removal of the branch network, particularly true in the UK at this point in time, and the States, it reinforces that very personal, important relationship with the bank manager if you've got that face-to-face going on. So video, niche, but very, very powerful at the same time. Voice, as I've said to you before, ideal when it's complex, when it's emotional, but it matters. And voice still has got amazing quality to it. I mean, I hope you're listening not just to the content of what I'm saying, but also the intonation of my voice and using that to help translate and understand what I'm saying. Emotion still flows very strongly in voice. It's interesting that when you get to text, we have to actually use emojis to reintroduce the notion of emotion. So it hasn't got quite the depth and bandwidth in terms of voice or video. And therefore, ideally, text should be used for slightly less complicated and slightly less emotive topics, if you can do that. Explanations, simple advice, etc., etc. So there's a very quick resume of the channels in terms of their core strengths and ideally how and when you could be using them. That's to do with the live side of life. Let's have a look at the self-service very, very quickly. There's really been terrific movement on this. I've been doing masterclasses for the last 4 or 5 years now on virtual assistants and bots. Some have just been text-based, some have been voice-based, as we know. Things like Google's Duplex at the end of last year really did show state-of-the-art in terms of the quality of speech recognition, to the point that California has now instituted a law that demands people inform customers when they are engaging with a non-human form of intelligence. If you look at the images there of the avatars, the one at the top there is from a fantastic organization called Soul Machines down in New Zealand. Again, super hyper-realistically real. And so what we have seen in that period of time, and will continue to see, is an underlying set of technologies which are in rude health, still improving, still evolving. You're seeing client organizations that are beginning to understand, intent management, the whole curation, human in the loop. And we're beginning to get much better about how we design and deploy self-service, and customers themselves are beginning to use it, beginning to have positive experiences. And again, that's setting that liquid expectation that I talked about earlier on. So we're on a positive trajectory as far as that is concerned. The one thing I would say is that in order to, reduce live down to that 20 to 25% mark that I suggested is possible over a number of years, as far as self-service is concerned, there's some really short-term wins. Go onto the website, go onto the self-service page, go and get your FAQs, put that into a conversational design interface, that will get much greater adoption. But beyond that, low-hanging fruit, there's a bigger issue. And the bigger issue goes back to the conversation about journeys. And there's a simple truth here. And the thing actually you're looking at the moment is a customer journey map, which is issued and designed on behalf of the UK government. And it relates to a service that they provide to parents around offering school vouchers for meal vouchers for school dinners. The upper part of that diagram represents positive emotion from customers. The bottom part of the diagram represents when they have negative emotion. So if you don't look at any more detail there, you can pretty well tell that it's not a pleasant journey from the customer's point of view. In fact, the only time customers get positive is when the child finally, in the second to last part of the journey, stage of the journey, receives the meal. But in terms of the length of time it takes and the difficulty of the process, it's really not good. Now, in that situation, you know, when it's really not well organized, what are people going to do? You know, the UK government might not have issued an app as far as that's concerned, but they're still expecting people to go through a whole number of stages over a very extended period of time. It's not going to work. It's just going to go, do you know what? I want to speak to somebody. I'm so upset. I've got to have somebody to help me through. So the principle here is this. Your journeys need to have become simplified to the point at which the experience of engaging with them is primarily positive and it's very short and easy to complete, as this transformed picture of that particular government journey suggested. So the rule of thumb here is simplify before expecting major self-service adoption. That's the middle layer. The other layer is proactive. And again, as I defined it, it's anticipating and knowing what customers need before they do. You can do this work through, you know, workshopping with advisors, but I think the bigger picture is to say that it's really the age of machine learning as it starts to impact customer service that will deliver huge insight into those patterns of repeated customer demand. The image we've got of that iceberg again suggests that a great deal of the data that we have on our customers remains underneath the surface of our attention, our ability to get hold of it. And again, we should expect in the not too distant future to be able to, amongst many other things, see the patterns around of repeated behaviors. And if we can anticipate that, it means we can proactively communicate, which means we can reduce inbound. That's a smart thing, both for customers and also for the brands. So, as I said, it's a quick walk through the design principles, the three things at the end of the day. And there's just one last big idea that I want to share before we wrap up. And that is that we need to make things coordinated and simple from the customer's point of view. I hope that idea has landed very strongly for you. The other thing, though, is that the other stakeholder in this is the advisor themselves. And I believe you cannot have an effective omni-channel strategy and capability unless you have dealt with the issue of the desktop, which is to say it's the place, the dustbin often, where you have got many different applications, databases, channels, protocols, sources of information open all at the same time. And that means that the advisor's attention is all upon the logistics and the complexity of trying to sort that out. And clearly that is just unacceptable. So therefore, my definition of omni-channel is that it needs a unified queue to make sense of the conversation, and it needs a unified desktop to allow the advisor community to focus upon the customer experience, not the complexity of getting stuff done. So with that said, to summarize, we are about orchestrating voice, text, and video, whatever versions, across a number of devices through either live, self-serve, or proactive. Understand the journeys in order to do that. And as a broader point, by the way, this applies not just to customer service, it applies to all the interactions that we have across the life cycle. So, you know, the bot, which you discover at the first point of claim, do you do this? Right at the early stages of marketing funnel through to, I've bought this, it needs fixing. It should be persistent in terms of how we engage with customers. So what we're doing here in terms of omni-channel design could and should extend to your service, sales, and marketing colleagues as well.